Alt-C. Then Alt. Yeah. There you go. Okay. All right. Well, good morning, all.
Good morning.
Oh, yeah, we have some going to Idaho today, right? Yeah. Okay. Well, hope that they're doing okay and that they'll have safe travels back to us. Jordan's out sick this morning, so he hopes to be able to make it for Bible, not Bible, this is Bible class, make it for our worship hour. But we are going to finish this short section of Matthew 17 and move on into some further information from Matthew 18. If you remembered, I asked you to read Mark 9, Luke 9, also in preparation for our study of Matthew 18, because a lot of that information is going to help us to better comprehend, understanding, putting things together, tying things together that need to be put together, and what Jesus is going to be discussing. So in closing Matthew 17, 24 and 25 on the screen, Jesus has already been involved in helping and teaching his disciples. They are struggling with different things that are facing them in the work that is before them. And as they move on from those events, and when they were come to Capernaum, they that received tribute money came to Peter and said, Doth not your master pay tribute? He saith, Yes. Now, here is just another attempt on the Jews' part, Pharisees, scribes, Sadducees, just another attempt to try to criticize Jesus. Now, it's interesting about the question that here they come asking Peter, and they do not ask Peter, are you going to pay tribute? Now, why do you think they would ask Peter this question instead of actually going to the one who the subject of discussion is actually about? Why ask Peter instead of actually going to Jesus directly?
Wasn't it part of their screening process? Just to gather their intel before they can do whatever schemes that they're going to do?
Okay. We are being shown the plans and actions of the enemy. As we said, in going through this study, we're studying psychology, human behavior, how people think, how people tick. They're not going to go to Jesus because they know Jesus is going to give them a direct answer, and he's going to give them an answer that's actually going to end up shutting them down. We've already seen several times throughout our Matthew study that they come asking Jesus a question. He answers them in such a way that what does the scripture end up saying after that? Come asking a question, he answers their question, and then what happens? Or what's the description that's said about them? Do they try to ask him any more questions? No, it actually says they go away and they were not going to ask him any more questions. So they already know how it's going to go. So now what's the plan? We won't go, do what?
Go behind his back.
Go behind his back. Go to somebody in the circle and see if we can't get some type of conflict going on between them.
Or a contradiction.
Or a contradiction to where Jesus will have to clean this up later. All of this is just some type of attempt to bring about some type of disruption. So possibility number one, to get some kind of division between Peter and Jesus. Possibility number two, something that Jesus would have to address and clean up later, that they can come and throw this in his face. Well, Peter said, blah, blah, blah. And it's just like, all right, now I've got to go ahead and address this issue and address this matter. We see the same thing that that definitely goes on today within the political realm, dealing with certain candidates. Well, your aide said such and such. We can see it with our current presidency, where the man in office is making all kinds of blunders, and who has to come up behind him and clean his mess? Which even then, they don't clean up his mess, they just make a bigger one. But it's the same kind of tactics. any weak, small attempt to try to tear down. Now, what's the problem with the answer that Peter gives?
He's trying to pacify them and set aside a confrontation and answer what he wants them to hear or they want to hear without
Actually knowing.
actually knowing.
Okay, all right, that's good. So when we're considering this, and it's just, I mean, number one, this is part of the problem that Peter's been having all along. Speaking up when he shouldn't. Because if you stop and you consider it, here they are asking Peter this question, and it's like, Peter, who are you to answer for the Messiah? Who are you to answer on the behalf of Jesus as to whether or not he's going to pay tribute? All right, so there's one factor in this. Number two, we learn a lesson about when we are put on the spot. And that's what's happening here. Do we think that Peter was just expecting them? You know what, I bet you at some point they're going to come asking me if Jesus is going to pay tribute. No, he wouldn't be ready for that, wouldn't be expecting that. Well, now the question comes up, and what does he feel like he has to do?
Give in.
Feels like he has to give an answer. Now, I know what 1 Peter 3:15 says, to where we should be ready to give an answer. But in every situation, that's not going to apply because, okay, you may just hit me with something that I'm not sure about, something I've not studied in a long time. And so what is it better for me to do in that situation?
Table it.
All right, say, I don't know, but I'll get back to you. That's what Peter should have done. Well, I really don't know what the answer to this is, but I can go get you the answer. So just because somebody has called us on the carpet or put us in a position where we feel like we need to answer, we're not needing to do that right away. Yeah?
Even with this, he doesn't really need to answer, does he?
No.
Because it's none of their business. So
Yeah.
it's like, why wouldn't you say it's none of your business and just walk away? Why fall into that trap of, oh, I'm being pressured and they're the people that seem like they have authority, I'm going to give in to.
Yeah.
So it's just one of those things that people get in their mind. These people have authority over me. I have to give an answer right away. And that's what Peter was falling into. So.
With regard to what Reese said, who would Jesus answer to if he is fulfilling the law
Right.
and he is or isn't paying tribute? Who follows up and makes sure that he is following the law?
Right.
In that sense.
Exactly. So it's more of the power struggle that we have going on here. Here are these individuals, and they are in a realm of authority. But just because you have some authority, does that grant you all authority? No, and that's what a lot of people have issues with. Especially, like we can see it in our secular world when you are working in an organization where you have several different types of managers. And a manager, I can't remember some of the terms, but assistant to the regional manager, he's in a certain place, but what's the danger that he faces with the position that he has?
Just that little bit of power.
Just that little bit of authority and power. And then what do they want to try to do? They want to try to dictate everything. Now, granted, with what's going on here, receiving tribute money, and this is a tax that's going towards the temple. Do they have an authority to question this and to ask about it? Yes, this is something that was set up by God. But what they're not taking into consideration is the same thing that Peter is not taking into consideration as well. And it has to do with something that he's already confessed. Now, okay, so yeah, if Peter, in this situation, had been thinking about what he has already mentioned, what he's already confessed in Matthew 16, that would have helped him with his answer here. So again, it's a situation of you can't just forget about what's happened in our previous studies. We're needing to carry it over. Peter should have carried that over as well. So when we think and even with that, with this situation, when we think that there are, some questions that are presented to us, that the question seems so obvious that the answer must be obvious too, we need to reconsider. And we may need to think about, well, okay, yeah, it just seems like, yeah, this is a reasonable question. It just seems reasonable that, yeah, Jesus would do this. But you need to take a step back and really think about it. So Peter gives the answer that he does. He saith yes, and when he was come into the house, Jesus prevented him, saying, What thinkest thou, Simon? Of whom do the kings of the earth take custom or tribute? Of their own children or of strangers? Peter saith unto him, Of strangers. Jesus saith unto him, Then are the children free. Now, Jesus knows what took place. And Jesus goes ahead and he addresses it. Before Peter can come in the house with everybody else, Jesus prevented him. Let's just go ahead and deal with this. Let's just go ahead and address it. Because Peter, you've done something, you've said something you shouldn't have. You've spoken out of turn here. So before Peter can enter in with the rest, Peter stopped and he's questioned again. What thinkest thou? It's very similar to the question that was brought up in Matthew 16. Who do men say that I, the Son of Man, am? They give their responses. Then Jesus turns the question around. He asks his apostles. He asks them directly, but who do you say that I am? What do you think? The question is being raised again. Peter, what do you think here? And he lays out the scenario. And one of the things, I really don't think that I've made mention of it throughout our study, but we'll make mention of it here, and you can go back and apply it in all the different places where we find this happening. We find with God, whether it be the Father or the Son in this occasion, when they are involved in teaching people, we find that one of the best means of trying to teach people is by asking them questions. All throughout with his apostles, in the way in which he's teaching them, it usually starts with a question. And even with all of this, he's asking him, how does this play out? When we go back to the very first situation or the very first sin that we have recorded, and that which took place in the garden, when God addresses Adam and Eve, how does he address them? Does he just come out in statement form of, here's what you did wrong, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5?
No, he asked a question.
He asked a question. And the reason why he's doing that is because you've got to figure out, you've got to admit, you've got to give the answer as to what you've done wrong. So it's one thing for me to come along and tell you what you've done wrong, but it's another thing for you to be involved in the process to where, okay, you've got to give the answer. And you've got to acknowledge this. And that's what's taking place here. Now, when he raises the question of whom do the kings of the earth take custom or tribute? Of their own children or of strangers? Again, as we said, Matthew 16 needs to come into play. Peter, what did you just confess before or when we came into the coast of Caesarea Philippi? Thou art the Christ, but you're not just the Christ. You are the Son of the living God. Now, we cannot fully appreciate what's happening here unless we keep that in mind, unless we remember that. The answer that Peter should have given was right there in his confession. When they came asking him, does your master pay tribute? And in remembering that he is the Son of God, then Peter should have recognized that, no, he has no obligation to do that. Because that is not who kings take tribute from. So with the way that Peter answered, if Peter had come back to Christ and brought about this question, or just given Jesus an opportunity to answer the question, this would have been another opportunity to teach whoever it is that's asking this question about his deity and about his divinity. That it would not just have been presented to Peter, but it would have been presented to everybody. And it's another attempt for him to have them recognize who he actually is. And that Peter should have understood, he should have recognized, no, Jesus is going to be exempt from this tax. But the conversation doesn't stop there. Notwithstanding, nevertheless, lest we should offend them, go thou to the sea, cast in hook, and take up the fish that first cometh up, and when thou hast opened his mouth, thou shalt find a piece of money, that take and give unto them for me and thee. Lest we should offend them. Jesus knew he was free from this. He knew that he was not obligated as the Son to perform and do what was required of everybody else. But because of his humility and because of his humanity, he performs with his disciples. You do this and give unto them for me and thee. He's putting himself alongside his apostles. He is setting aside his liberty and his birthright. Because, and number one, partly just because it was not needful to start a ruckus over this. We have a saying about choosing your battles, picking your battles. They're already gunning for him. And they're already trying to find any type of situation so as to discredit him. Now, if you go over to John's account and you view the events in the life of Christ and what's transpired, John chapter 6 is already going to come into play as to what's happening here. And in John chapter 6, they were ready to stone him because he's already made one claim of him being equal with God. What do you think this would have done? He's already done it once, now he's doing it again, and that just would have sent them over the edge. And Jesus knows it's not time for him to die yet. So what are we not going to do? Okay, I'm not going to use this occasion as a point of offense or a point of stumbling. I'm going to lay aside what my rights are so as to continue on the mission that needs to be done. Now, this is a great lesson for us, and it's a great opportunity for me to teach on it because a lot of people view me as just, well, you know, when it comes to teaching people and dealing with denominational doctrine, Mike is just, you know, rough as a cob when it comes to dealing with people. We're not needing to be offensive just for the sake of being offensive. And that's not what we're doing. And that's not what we're seeing with the life of Christ either. When it comes to dealing with doctrinal error, Jesus did not pull any punches. We've already looked in studying Matthew 15, and it said about the Pharisees being offended, and what did Jesus say? Let them be offended. But then here's a situation where he says, okay, I'm not going to offend them in this. And then granted, also, as we said, they that received tribute money came to Peter and said, doth not your master pay tribute? I don't know what class of people this actually is. I don't know if these are Pharisees. I don't know if these are Sadducees. I don't even know if they're scribes. I just know they're collecting taxation money for the temple. So with that in mind, it's just the occasion that, okay, This very well could just be somebody who's doing their civil responsibility. And thus we're taking all of that in consideration when we're looking at what should we do here. And that's what we're needing to do with every situation. And that is what I try to do with every situation. If I can view this as, well, okay, here's a situation where I'm not needing to necessarily ruffle a whole bunch of feathers, then I'm going to try to do that. But if I'm dealing with a situation like Pharisees, Sadducees, Matthew chapter 15, where it's like, okay, here's a bigger opportunity to show a greater lesson, then I'm going to do that. But what's really behind this situation here is what's leading up in the very next chapter. When we're considering, and we've already looked at it in our sermon from last week, when it comes to entering the kingdom and being great inside of the kingdom, Jesus makes mention of the fact that there's a conversion, there's a change that needs to take place. What kind of change is needing to happen? How does he describe it, the change? Verses 3 and 4.
Becoming as little children? Is that what you're saying?
All right. So becoming as little children, but then he takes it a step further. What's the next term? How does he describe the child?
Humble.
Humble. Right here, we have Jesus practicing humility. Oh yeah, I could stand up for my right, and I could stand up for my liberty, that I don't have to pay this tax. Jesus doesn't do that. He sets aside what is his rightful thing to do and does this instead for their benefit. His interest and his care for others to do something that he did not have to do. And that's what is being presented to us. That when it comes to Christianity and living out how it is that we're supposed to be, my interests are supposed to be his interest. And where I find Christ laying down his rights and liberties for the sake of others, I need to lay down my rights and my liberties for the sake of others. And thus you have Jesus performing right here the very thing that Paul mentions in 1 Corinthians 8 and 1 Corinthians 10. What did Paul say about eating meat if it offended a brother?
Don't do it. He wouldn't do it.
He taught them don't do it, but what did Paul say about himself? What was he willing to do?
To not eat it ever again.
He would never touch meat as long as the earth stood. That's humility. That's humbling yourself to focus on others instead of what's perfectly right for you to do. So as we close chapter 17, we're actually not closing it. Because what's happening here is setting the stage for what's going to happen in Matthew 18. And this point about not offending over the tribute is going to lead us into what I consider personally as one of the greatest sections of our study. It's a section, as we're talking about humbling ourselves, it ought to do that for us. It ought to be extremely sobering and give us some points to reflect on. And it's a section that has probably helped me the most. And it's because of how it continues on this thought processes about the cross. So before we move into chapter 18, any questions, comments, thoughts on this last section of 17? All right? Now, how to be great in the kingdom. Matthew 18. As we said, some of the most sobering and humbling things for us to study are going to be found right here. What we're about to study is the reason why Jesus could pay tribute when he did not have to. Why Paul would give up the eating of meat. And how we will not be selfish. To think about others first. To serve others before serving myself. It's all going to be found in this section. Now I say section because what's happening here, the discussion that starts in Matthew 18, notice Matthew 18:1. At the same time came the disciples unto Jesus saying, who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? This conversation, this study does not stop until Matthew 20:27. Because notice what Jesus says here. And whosoever will be chief among you. The question they start with, the subject matter is still here in Matthew 20. This section deals either directly or indirectly, whether it be through parable or direct teaching, to answer this question. Who is the greatest? And the reason why we need to study this in this way is because this section will help us find the answer to so many problems. This is not just a matter of, I know they're raising the question about in the kingdom, who shall be greatest in the kingdom? But this material is not just going to help us inside of the church. You want to have a great home life? This is the section. You want to have a great marriage? This is the section. Get along with your neighbors, be an outstanding citizen, be great at work, have a successful job. This is the section. We'll be able to find the answer to problems, collective problems, but also problems that we have on an individual basis. But this section is going to dissect the phrase or that short answer that we commonly give about the cross. Well, you want to solve all these problems, you want to solve this problem of selfishness, the cross is the answer. Okay. But as we said, that's too vague. That's too general. And even as Jesus makes that statement, he's breaking that down through the rest of his time here on earth. And so we're going to dissect it as well. And in going through this, we need to make sure that we're reading the cross sections or the cross references. So for the sake of time, I'm going to trust that we've read through Matthew's account, that you've gone through that on your own, to where we're now just going to read into different sections of the cross references. Mark 9:33, beginning. He came to Capernaum, and being in the house, he asked them, what was it that ye disputed among yourselves by the way? Now right there at the beginning, Mark gives us an extra detail that Matthew doesn't give. If we only read Matthew's account, we would think, oh, well, this is just a calm collective conversation that's taking place, and that they just casually had this question. But Mark tells us, no, a fight broke out over this. That this caused a big disruption amongst the disciples and amongst the apostles as to who's going to be the greatest. Who is going to serve who in this situation? Much like Joseph and his brothers, and how that all turned out. But they held their peace, for by the way they had disputed among themselves who should be the greatest. Luke 9:46, then there arose a reasoning, but it's the same word for a dispute there, among them, which of them should be greatest. Now, with the lack of understanding and comprehension that they're having, about Jesus and his ultimate plan, about him dying and being buried and resurrected, if they're struggling with that idea and they're thinking, well, no, Jesus is going to rule and Jesus is going to reign, then what's the point of even having this discussion? If you're recognizing who the leader is, then none of this should even matter. But as we said, it's all about the pecking order that ends up coming after that. Well, okay, yeah, Jesus is number one, but Jesus, who's your number two? Who's your favorite? And that's the kind of thing that brings about disruption. That's the kind of thing that messes up peace, is when individuals, when people start jockeying for position. And Jesus is going to address it. He's going to say, you're looking at this the wrong way. Verse 43, Jesus then brings in situations similar to what we've read in Matthew chapter 5. And in Matthew 18, he brings up the same situation about the eye and the hand. If it offend, cut it off, as he's already mentioned in Matthew chapter 5. But in verse 43 of Mark 9, here's what he says. And if thy hand offend thee, cut it off. It is better for thee to enter into life maimed than having two hands to go into hell, into the fire that never shall be quenched. Verse 44, where their worm dieth not, and the fire is not quenched. If thy foot offend thee, cut it off. It is better for thee to enter halt into life, than having 2 feet to be cast into hell, into the fire that never shall be quenched, where their worm dieth not, and the fire is not quenched. And if thine eye offend thee, pluck it out. It is better for thee to enter into the kingdom of God with one eye, than having 2 eyes, to be cast into hell fire, where their worm dieth not, and the fire is not quenched. With this type of description, we really need to think about this. This situation, this event, it caused an unnecessary controversy. And we also have in Mark's account and also in Luke's account that this conversation caused John to do some hard searching, some serious reflection. Because John raises the question of, well, Master, there was somebody out here performing miracles that wasn't with our group. And we told him to stop what he was doing. And Jesus gives the answer that, well, you shouldn't have done that. But inside of this section, inside of this controversy, shows us the reason why they did it. It's because of this whole situation of trying to get position. Well, you're not with us, so you need to stop what you're doing. And it caused them to look down on people. And thus Jesus shows to them, this is going to be your destiny, this is going to be your outcome if you don't get a handle on this. Now, if that's what's being said to the apostles, then how much consideration do we need to take into this? A whole lot. It's addressing this attitude of pride. Well, you're not a part of this group here. You're not a part of this work here. Therefore, what you're doing is second rate. Is second best. And that's not the mentality we're supposed to have. But you can see that mentality with different kind of works and different kind of things that are going on throughout the brotherhood. Well, if you're not doing it this way, then you're just not doing it right. You're not going to be accepted. What you're doing is not good enough. No. If you're out there doing something, it's going to be appreciated. It's going to be acknowledged. And even in this discussion, Matthew's account, Mark's account, Luke's account, Jesus breaks it down to its simplest element. What example does he give as to something that a disciple can do so as to benefit others that they're going to be acknowledged for?
Is this when he brings the child there?
When he brings the child, but then he takes it a step further. Even if you give a cup of water, you're not going to lose your reward. Now, what does that say about what it is that God is expecting from us? What He's expecting us to do? Does everything we do have to be big, over the top? No. Even the little things for these little ones is going to be acknowledged. He's changing the view and perspective on everything about the work. So in dealing with that one that wasn't in their group and dealing with the attitude of pride, He's helping the apostles to realize that they're not needing to be in the business of rejecting people because they're viewed as being little, undesirable, or unimportant. But also we have being shown through this, not only the negative side, if you're not going to be involved in doing this, but we have the positive in it. For every one shall be salted with fire, and every sacrifice shall be salted with salt. Salt is good, but if the salt have lost his saltness, wherewith will ye season it? Have salt in yourselves, and have peace one with another.
What book is this?
This is still in Mark.
Okay.
Yeah, Mark 9, 47 through 50. So just as we said, if we will study this section properly and we will apply it, do the things that are in it, here's the outcome. Peace one with another. You want peace in the church? Here's what we need to study. You want peace at home? Here's what we need to study. Peace in the community, peace at work, just peace all over. Here's where it is. Here's where peace develops. These principles are essential to peace in my life, my home, and the congregation. Now, when we have this phrase or the section here, for everyone shall be salted with fire. First thoughts. What comes to mind? What do you think he's saying?
The first thing that comes to my mind is tried, or
Okay. All right, that's good. And that would be it. Because as we've gone through all of these sections, and not only in these sections, but even going into the epistles, when it comes to trial, tribulations, turmoil, it is the idea of going through fire. In the Old Testament, it's the idea of silver or gold that's tried through fire, comes out better on the other side. But when we have this discussion, for everyone shall be salted with fire. Now that's connection back to the Old Testament. When they're offering their sacrifices, the sacrifices were to be salted. Now we've got some cooks in here. What happens to salt when you apply it to meat and then you cook it? Have you never thought about it?
Well, it shrinks.
Okay.
It provides flavor.
Okay, now why does it
Causes
provide
the
flavor?
moisture. Because it mixes with the juices and the heat.
It's getting into the meat, isn't it? So when Jesus says, have salt in yourselves, this is something that's to come from within. This is going to be something that if we take this in, it's just going to be a part of us now. What helps us with that? What helps us with that is going through the trials. Is going through the difficulties of learning these processes. Right now, the apostles are going through the trial. And if they will come out of this learning what Jesus wants, then they will be salted with fire. It's going to be built into them. And thus, being built in, having salt in yourselves, that's just going to help with the peace process. To whereas we go through this, it's not just the matters, like more than likely we're not going to pick this up just by what we're hearing today. Where you're really going to pick this up, where the salt is going to go in, is when it hits the fire. When you hit that fire. And you go through an event, whether you're successful or unsuccessful at doing these things, you need to learn from it. And in learning from that situation, that salt gets ingrained. It gets burnt in. You got something?
Well, I'm just thinking of a correlation. Can we correlate what James has to say about counting it all joy?
Right, yeah. James writes about that. And for that matter, here we are dealing with the apostles and the struggles that Peter is having about it. 1st and 2nd Peter, when he writes to those brethren, he also writes to them about the trying of their faith and the going through fire, and how that's going to end up being a great benefit for them and a helping them for what they're going to face in the future. So yeah, that's all that I have there in my notes. So, when we're thinking about what's transpiring here, what's being presented, we have here, shouldn't have the problem, it should be the solution. We have here the solution to congregational problems, eldership problems. A lot of the times within an eldership, you have this very situation taking place that's happening with the apostles. Well, who's actually in charge here? And what you have with an eldership is a mutual leadership. You don't have one elder who's calling all the shots. Now, typically, that's what ends up happening. But that's not the way it's supposed to be. It is a mutual leading, which means you're not always going to get your way. Marriage problems, so on and so forth. Any problem that comes up can be solved through this section. It's the tap root is here. Now let's go on to Luke's account. Luke 9:43. They were all amazed at the mighty power of God, but while they wondered, everyone at all things which Jesus did, he said unto his disciples. Here is how Jesus sets it up with Luke's account. Let these sayings sink down into your ears. Salt, that is from within. Seed that falls on good ground takes root. And Jesus says that here, let it sink down into your ears. Let it get down into your core, into your memory banks. For the Son of Man shall be delivered into the hands of men. But they understood not this saying, and it was hid from them that they perceived it not, and they feared to ask him of that saying. Then there arose a reasoning amongst them, which of them should be greatest. Dropping down to verse 51, and it came to pass, when the time was come that he should be received up, he steadfastly set his face to go to Jerusalem. So what we skipped over is the same thing about if your eye offend, if your hand offend, cut it out, pluck it out, so on and so forth. And then we have a new situation that arises with the apostles that again is addressing this pride issue and their mentality of what the work is supposed to be about. Notice, verse 52, and sent messengers before his face, and they went and entered into a village of the Samaritans to make ready for him, and they did not receive him because his face was as though he would go to Jerusalem. So Jesus wants to go into Samaria, but they do not receive him. And then we see the reaction from James and John. When his disciples, James and John, saw this, they said, Lord, wilt thou that we command fire to come down from heaven and consume them even as Elias or Elijah did? Now just look at the reaction. And Jesus says, but he turned and rebuked them and said, Ye know not what manner of spirit ye are of. For the Son of Man is not come to destroy men's lives, but to save them. And they went to another village. Let's look at the attitude. Look at how they are viewing others around them. And this is a symptom of something else. They're willing to view these Samaritans this way because look at the way they're viewing each other. You can learn a great deal about how a congregation or Christians view people on the outside by how they view each other on the inside. And if you do not have proper care, concern for your brethren that are within, how are you going to have care and concern for the lost? And Jesus illustrates to them, this is not what the work is about. That what we're trying to do, now is there condemnation involved in preaching the gospel? Yes, there is. But that's not what our business is about. Our business is about not destroying men's lives, but we are here so as to help save them. And it's easy to lose sight of that. That everything we end up doing ends up being a situation, a position where we're coming to destroy. We're coming to bring the axe. Instead of throwing out a lifeline. And why is that? It's because of not getting a grasp of what's happening here. Of what Jesus is going to end up showing to the apostles and end up showing to us. So going back into Matthew's account with all of that in view, all of that stored away, Jesus then says, and said, Verily I say unto you, except you be converted and become as little children, ye shall not enter into the kingdom of heaven. Whosoever therefore shall humble himself as this little child, the same is greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Whosoever shall receive one such little child in my name receiveth me. But whoso shall offend one of these little ones, which believe in me, notice here, it were better for him that a millstone were hanged about his neck, and that he were drowned in the depth of the sea. Now again, we have the seriousness of this discussion. This is required to enter into the kingdom, into the church, into Christ. But not only that, with verse 6, we have the contrast. Okay, if you will do this, here's the good things that will happen. But if you do not do this, notice the extreme nature of condemnation. And just look at how severe it is. I cannot think of any worse way of dying than being burned alive or drowning. And yet that is the imagery that Jesus uses if we're not going to do this. So with that, we have the seriousness of what it is that we're saying when we're saying we want to be a Christian. Oh, you want to be a Christian? Here's going to be the punishment if you don't follow through with this. I might want to reconsider this. Yeah, you might. And it amazes me how we have our religious friends around us, and they want to treat Christianity like some type of plaything. This sets it on a whole new plane of how real this is. Jesus says it would be better to suffer drowning than to suffer the punishment that comes from disobeying this. That is serious.
We're still going to make it to the third level of heaven.
Yeah, right. Yeah, this is not metaphor. This is not figurative language. This is literal. And there are many brethren that have gone through the ritual of salvation. They've heard, they've believed, they've repented, they've confessed, and they've been baptized in water. But they've missed conversion. And right here is being presented to us as to what it takes. You want to be converted? This is what it takes. This is the level of commitment that you've got to be willing to make. Now again, Jesus is not talking to people on the outside. He is with His disciples. These are His apostles. If they did not get this, they would not make it. Now what about us? Now I understand there's grace, but we've already been studying grace runs out. The grace period that they are getting is right here. The 3 years that they have with Jesus, this is your grace period to get this down. And if you're not going to get it, this is your outcome. The argument that they're having is because of a failure to apply Matthew 5 through 7. And what we have being shown to us is the application. We can go through and study it. It's like, okay, here's what you need to do. But what does that look like? Take up your cross, follow me. Okay, I hear you say that, but what does that look like? This is it. What the apostles are struggling with is what we struggle with. We all like recognition. And Satan knows this. And he takes advantage of that desire to bring about disputes and needless disruptions. Think back to the garden with Eve. What was it that got her? You'll be like God. Oh boy. And she took and she did something she wasn't supposed to. Whenever I allow myself and the desire to want to be noticed, then I've not realized the teaching of the cross. And this is a major problem when it comes to those that have a desire to be preachers. All of this can become a situation, a manner of recognition. But if I'm going to take in the teachings of the cross, then I'm going to live and I'm going to recognize to the degree where my life is not going to glorify self, but that my life is going to be used for the service and the purpose of glorifying God. To the degree that I'm going to be willing to do something like this, to give my time to something that's probably not going to get me any type of recognition. And a lot of times there are preachers, elders, that they will push this kind of business off to somebody else because, oh, that's beneath me. That's too little for me. I don't need to do that. Give that to somebody else. If that's the mentality, we've got a problem. There's nothing too little for me to do. And if I'm not willing to do these little things, then I do not need to be in charge of the big things. So as we're going through this, we're also getting a glimpse into what's involved in great leadership. So this is elder study material, leadership material. That if you want to be great, you want to be a leader, you got to be willing to help people. And not just people that are going to help promote you, that have pull and have power and prestige. You've got to be willing to go down to these little insignificant ones. And we can see with the apostles, they're not willing to do that. We've already seen it. The multitudes that followed Jesus for 3 days, and now it's time for them to eat. What was the mentality?
Go.
Well, send them off. You're not getting it. And when they should have been realizing all those things, then this fight breaks out. And this isn't the only time. This isn't the last time this is going to happen. We're going to see it brought up again. We're needing to have the realization, if we're not going to understand this, if we're not going to do this, it's going to cost us our soul. Said, verily I say unto you, except ye be converted. There's the difficult part. The change that must happen. That's the hard part. And Jesus in Matthew 20, 25 and 26, He shows to them how their mentality and their thinking about this is needing to change. But Jesus called them unto Him and said, Ye know that the princes of the Gentiles exercise dominion over them, and they that are great exercise authority upon them. But it shall not be so among you. All right? Notice the illustration. The Gentiles, whoa. Why are you bringing them into this? You know, Jesus, that's a low blow right there. And that you're wanting to compare us to the Gentiles. Hey, if the shoe fits, you wear it. The Gentiles, this is how they exercise dominion. This is how they exercise power and authority. Yeah, they bring it down on all these different ones. But it's not going to be with you. But whosoever will be great among you, let him be your minister. We must lay aside how the world measures greatness. And going back into Mark 9, 38 through 40, where you have John answered him, saying, Master, we saw one casting out devils in thy name, and he followeth not us. And we forbade him because he followed not us. John, who are you, who are any of you, to come along and say to somebody else, hey, you need to stop what you're doing? But Jesus said, forbid him not, for there is no man which shall do a miracle in my name that can lightly speak evil of me, for he that is not against us is on our part. Pride will cause me to have the wrong attitude towards people. Like the apostles having the wrong attitude right here. This man is not in our group, so he's not in the same league with us. And you just need to stop. And to a large degree, our brethren think that if they are going to be successful in the kingdom, they have to be connected with big names. That they've got to hitch their wagon with the PTP circle or the lectureship circle. Jesus did not operate that way. And even right here, with this disciple, he's not needing to hook up with the apostles and follow them around from place to place so as to be able to do something great. He is out there teaching the same things that Jesus is teaching. He is out there doing the same things that Jesus says that need to be done. So, okay, you go out there and you do what's needing to be done, and we'll get twice as much work done. So we see the same situation playing out here that we have with Paul and Barnabas over in the book of Acts. There's a disruption that takes place, but it's not to the degree that we have taking place here. And why? Because Paul was a humble man. To where he said, I don't want to take John, but if you want to take him, fine. You take John, I'll take somebody else, we'll go here, you go here. And there was no disruption. And twice the amount of work got done. Why? Because we're not in this battle for who's in charge. Barnabas, I'm Paul, you need to listen to me. Doesn't do that. And the work continues on. So much of the work is not being done today inside of the brotherhood because of this problem here. Too many people have already established, to a large degree, our brotherhood is under the pastor system. They hire a man, and even when they have an eldership, you have an eldership, but you've hired a preacher, and you're looking to him to do everything. What do you think that does to a preacher's mentality, to his mindset? Okay, I'm top dog. I'm calling the shots. And what I say we're going to do, and nobody else has any good ideas but me. That's not how it's set up. That's not how it's designed to operate. And all of this section cuts that out. But just as we said, it's not just a congregational thing. What about the leadership inside of the home? Yeah, husbands are the head of the wife. But does that just mean you're top dog and everything you say goes? No. There's a mutual partnership inside of that thing. Well, what's going to help me with that? If you're converted as a little child and you're humble, you'll save yourself a lot of arguments. So just as we've seen with the Corinthian brethren, what was it that caused so much disruption with them?
Divisions.
All right, but what caused the divisions? Pride. Remember in chapter 1, Paul addresses them and he says, some of you say, I am of Paul. I am of Apollos. I am of Cephas. I am of Christ. What was that Greek word for I? Are we forgetting our Corinthian study? No, what'd you say? Christina.
Can I cheat?
Say it loud. Ego.
That's a great word.
What's causing division here? It's ego. What causes division inside of congregations, inside of the church? Ego. Home,
I
marriages.
had that written there, and you should have gave me a couple more seconds.
All of this is designed to remove that. And that's where greatness lies. So any thoughts, questions, comments on that look of Matthew 18? We're going to do some more in our sermon.
No, it's very good.
Okay.
I love it all.
All right, then we will stop there and transition over.